Hello and what is up YouTube? My name is G3Iron and today we got this particular post from the team at Grinding Gear Games about recent topics from the community podcasts where Chris Wilson, the lead developer of Grinding Gear Games, has been going around and generously giving his time and answering questions and interacting with different community members and responding to different topics that we as a community have been providing feedback on to the team at Grinding Gear Games. I haven't read this full post, so let's jump in, let's read it together, and then let's chat about it as we go. In the last few weeks, Chris Wilson has appeared on 2 community interviews to discuss Path of Exile, and while we recommend watching them in full for context, we wanted to create written reference for a few of the key points that came up. If you haven't checked them out already, you can find the Bay Class interview featuring Tarky, Raze QT, Octavian, Ziggity, and Noogie here, and the Zizarin and Mathel interview here. Chris will also appear on another podcast later this week, hosted on Gazzy's channel here alongside community streamers Grimro and Crouching Tuna. Tune in on September 1st at local time. This is displayed in your local time. We've made a countdown for you here. By the way, all the links to all of the posts that we ever discuss or the references or helpful hyperlinks are located down below in the video description if you want to reference any of those particular links. All right, game balance. One of the most pressing topics that was discussed during Bayclast is what players should expect in terms of nerfs going forward and whether we would see a continuation of sweeping nerfs as we saw in 3.1.5. While we do intend to continue to make the campaign Acts 2 through 10 more challenging, we do not have any other sweeping nerfs planned in terms of game systems and player power, although you still should expect the usual assortment of buffs and nerfs to specific skills. All right, so we've got it in writing. It is in writing. There are no more, at the moment, planned massive sweeping nerfs for 3.16 moving forward. Chris had said that. He'd hinted at it. He explicitly had said it a couple of different times on the various podcasts, but now we've got it in writing confirming that the plan is not to continue with the nerf line. So I guess my question for those of you who have enjoyed 3.15 and those of you who have said, yes, GGG is just starting to implement these things, which, by the way, is what GGG teased before 3.15. Like Chris said, oh, we're just starting on all of our nerfs. What are your thoughts now? Like they said they're not planning any other big sweeping nerfs, but anyway, maybe you've got more thoughts on that. So drop me a comment down below if you've got thoughts. I know a lot of us had differing opinions about that when GGG first said 3.15 is just the first wave of many nerfs to come. So I guess that's the official statement on that. In 3.16, we plan to further nerf Fortify. So right after they say we don't have any sweeping nerfs, they say, hey, here's a specific nerf we've got. Okay. To bring it in line with its intended use as a defensive tool for melee characters. However, we noted in the discussion that many players were concerned about what defensive options would be available for self-cast characters. Yeah, namely, you just get exploded. If you're playing self-cast, you're just playing a glass cannon character. That's what you are. We don't have anything to announce on this front yet, but have noted the feedback and will work on a plan ahead of Fortify's upcoming nerf. Note that we will likely also address Aurabots in some way. We're aware that this has been a hot topic in the community. I would expect a new support gem to come out that would be for self-casters. If Fortify is supposed to be the melee, up to X amount of percentage of reduced damage taken, if that's what Fortify is supposed to be, if it's supposed to be a melee support gem that is a defensive option specifically to reduce damage taken, then I would assume that self-casters will get something like that. I think what Chris had chatted about with Mathel and Ziz, and maybe also on Bayclast a little bit, was reducing Fortify's effectiveness based on the melee damage of the specific skill used. So in other words, the more damage that you do with a melee skill, the more effective Fortify is. I would expect something similar to that for self-cast characters. That would be my assumption. Maybe something like based on the mana or percentage of your mana spent, then you'll get a reduction of damage. So, it might be more of an active skill. It might be a support gem in the way that Fortify is now, but it would be based on range skills or it would only be used with spells. I just feel like folks could get around that. Folks would just set it up on like a Hydrosphere or a Orb of Storm setup in order to proc it. So I would imagine that GGG might try to have either an active skill gem in the future kind of like Arcane Cloak, or they might just say Arcane Cloak is it, or even Sigil of Power. Like they might just say, hey, that's what self-cast characters have, which is clearly not enough, at least for the self-cast community, to say that that's tanky. But they're discussing it, right? They're discussing it. Also, it's interesting in here that they're discussing aura bots. We will also address aura bots in some way. Okay, is that going to be through mana multipliers? Is that going to, because then it's not just aura bots. Is that going to be in unique items that are making aura bots very strong, or aura stacking characters? Is that the Delirium notables that make them very strong? It'll be interesting to see specifically how that gets implemented. All right, moving on. We are also investigating whether we can announce future balance changes sooner than usual, ideally ahead of the main expansion announcement livestream, so that players can provide feedback early with enough time for us to potentially act on it. Hey, this is great, right? This is great. The more time that they give us as a community to react to something, to read through something, to plug it into POB, to mess around with it, to simulate it even in-game and standard, the more time we have to play around with stuff and then give feedback prior to a league launch, probably the better. This isn't, please take note, this isn't moving to an open beta or a closed beta or a PTR or anything like that. But this is at least something. It's saying, hey, we want to get you some more time about balance changes. So, I'm not sure if patch notes, like if they bumped patch notes a week ahead, so rather than 3 days, if it was 10 days worth of digesting patch notes, I don't think that would be good. I think for the community, it is kind of good to build the hype and to kind of be like, okay, wait till patch notes and then have this massive Christmas crunch, as it were, for players to go, from Tuesday to Friday for a league start, essentially planning builds and taking a look at things. I think that is good for the game, that timeline. But things other than the patch notes, other teases that we've seen GGG do in the past, I think that works. So I think the more... There is a threshold where, I can't just say the more information ahead of time, the better. I don't think if we had patch notes 10 days ahead of time that would be good. I don't think that would be good. I think that players would beat to death the patch notes, and it would absolutely be overwhelming for the team at Grinding Gear Games. Which that might already be some of the community reaction. Some of the community reaction, that's part of the challenge of opening yourself up to community feedback, is that if the community abuses it or really gives you too much feedback, then it's tough to keep up with it. And then you risk angering your player base even more because they feel like now you're not listening to them. Which is part of the whole discussion at the moment in POE. Okay, we were unhappy with how some of the nerfs that took place during 3.15 ended up. While we have already reduced some of the mana nerfs early in Expedition, we will continue to keep an eye on this. With our rework to flasks, we agree with player sentiment that it feels there are too few defensive options available and too few sources of ailment mitigation to help overcome Path of Exile's obstacles. We don't have plans to announce yet, but we will be reviewing the defensive options that are available to players and how to make them more accessible. Okay, so nothing specific on that, but they're keeping an eye on it. Is this going to be a new bingo meme? We will keep an eye on this. Is we hear you? Is this we're working on it? Is this actions speak louder than words? Is that what this is? Is this a new catchphrase that we can meme? Oh man, I'm just here for the memes, guys. I'm just here for the good times. All right, ailments. We discussed some of the potential improvements we can make to players' sources of ailment mitigation. Please note that these have not been locked in as firm plans just yet, but are ideas that we're considering to give you an idea of our current thoughts. All right, so here's some current thoughts. Adding more ailment mitigation or avoidance to skills. For example, adding appropriate mitigation to Purity of Fire, Purity of Ice, and Purity of Lightning auras with a more notable source on Purity of Elements. All right, what's going to be interesting there is note that we will likely address aura bots, and then, hey, we're going to make some auras better. There's already a tension in the development cycle. That's just a potential hurdle right there. Adding more powerful mitigation for various buffs and effects to the Pantheon. Ideally, one for each ailment or immunity. For things like Ignite and Poison, it would be more likely to provide a high reduced effect rather than immunity. Okay, that's cool. Adding new clusters to the passive tree to mitigate Poison and Bleed. Adding Bleed mitigation to Steel Skin, and potentially changing Bone Armor from the Necromancer Ascendancy. Okay, that could be interesting. Yeah. I have not played any summoner build that has truly felt like no, I can't quite say that. Bone Armor has its place. What I was thinking about saying was I haven't played any Necromancer build that Bone Armor has truly been game changing. It's just kind of a weird Ascendancy spot. Like, here's what I think about the Ascendancies after the latest rework, just in a short sentence. So they pulled off like skeletons, zombies, individualized stuff off of the Necromancer because they wanted just you to be free to choose other Ascendancies, right? Other than the Necromancer, to play minions in general, right? Not to have those specific skills and those specific buffs attached to the Necromancer. And I thought that was probably a good thing overall since it's happened. But then Bone Armor is on there like, hey, there's this very specific, skill that you can get that's very helpful to your Ascendancy. That's one of the few sources of damage mitigation that you can get as a summoner player from your Ascendancy. It's really the only one. I guess, you get the extra elemental resistances as well. But it's one of the few, if not the only, defensive aspect of the Ascendancy. And so moving it to the tree, I guess, is just a way to say that might be better. Or maybe even just moving Bone Armor to a gem slot. That could be an interesting nerf to minions in general. Like, hey, it's an option if you want to use it, and it's there, and maybe it's available with better uptime, but it just feels weird that you use an Ascendancy point or an Ascendancy lab to get Bone Armor, and it doesn't feel nearly as impactful as your other points on the Ascendancy, which maybe it shouldn't. Maybe not every Ascendancy point should feel that way, but that's my thoughts. Okay, adding Ignite mitigation to Molten Shell. It's probably a good idea, except like, does Molten Shell need to be stronger? Like, we just went through a cycle where Molten Shell had to get nerfed, right? Because it was too strong and armor was too good, and that was a phrase that nobody ever thought we would say back in 310. Armor is too good. Nobody ever thought that. Adding additional corrupted implicits on various items with a focus on jewels that provide ailment mitigation. Okay. Changing Consecrated Ground to provide 50% reduced effective curses on those with the buff while moving the curse effect mitigation cluster to be more central and accessible. That could be interesting. That would make Consecrated Ground better. That would be an inherent buff to the Inquisitor just right away. Yeah. Adding additional jewel mods to the regular jewel mod pool that allow for mitigating ailments. Reviewing existing avoidance and mitigation mods to make sure they're in line with the current game. For example, buffing Abyss Jewel ailment avoidance mods from 20% up to 35%. Who's playing Light Shroud? Anybody playing Light Shroud next league? Reviewing the crafting options available for mitigating ailments and ensuring there are enough options, particularly at lower levels. Changing the shield ailment avoidance mod to be available on all shields. Adding crafting options for cannot be shocked, cannot be chilled, cannot be ignited, cannot be poisoned, take no extra damage from bleed while moving, and cannot be frozen. See, this is a good question. Why is it that we can have some mods available on craft and others not available? There have been design decisions that have gone into that in the past. So I guess what's the benefit if there's all these ways? Like, I thought the whole point of the flask changes with 315 and ailments was to make it so that way we had to feel ailments more. If they just give us a bunch of ways to get rid of ailments again, like, do you guys see any of that tension? I don't know. Maybe I'm totally out of touch. That would not be new. Mrs. Draconis would agree with that, by the way. My kids would agree with that. Dad, you're out of touch. Flasks. While we are happy with how instilling orbs, wow, say that 10 times fast when you're tired. While we are happy with how instilling orbs, I need to do this in an accent. Crikey! While we're happy with how instilling orbs have helped players not have to precisely time the usage of certain I almost said flasks. Of certain flasks, we are generally unhappy with the results of other changes in our 315 flask rework. All right, so they're unhappy with it. So we're unhappy with it. They're unhappy with it. Okay. This is partially due to the disruption of accessible player defenses and ailment mitigations as described above. Yeah? You think? No, we're all on the same page. I'm not mocking. I'm just saying, yeah, we're all on the same page there. We also have other things we'd like to improve about the flask system. That makes me nervous. What do you want to improve? We understand that there is a difference between needing flasks for proactive use and reactive use. As such, we're planning to revisit all mods on flasks and create 2 mod pools that focus on separating their usage as either proactive or reactive. Life and mana flasks will get mods from the reactive mod pool, and utility flasks will get mods from the proactive mod pool. Some mods, where appropriate, will be available in both pools. See, to me, this entire conversation, like, I'm glad we have the language for it, but that's what we used to have with flasks. Like, a life flask, it would only proc and it would only be valuable while your life was available to actually use the flask. And the same thing for your mana. Like, that's the entire point of those 2 flasks, is that you need to have mana gone or life gone to use those flasks. Their intention was clearly always to be reactive from the get-go in their design. Like, whereas utility flasks that just give you resistance, let's say, a topaz flask or a ruby flask, or, you know, an adrenaline flask, right? Or a diamond flask. Those are clearly proactive in their nature. So we've kind of always had that. So this is part of what's confused me about this in the design space. Is like, we've always had this, guys. Why is this like a big dawning discussion point? Like, the game has always been designed this way. Quality of life flasks are always proactive, and staying alive defensive flasks, resource flasks, are always reactive. But I don't know. Maybe I've missed something along the way. We are also planning to create tiers for flask mods so that they can be scaled to appropriate levels in the endgame like other item mods. This should restore some of the power that was previously available through flasks while avoiding making them overpowered in the early and mid game. Okay, so in other words, everybody who has complained during 315 that early game and mid game players, casual players, I use the term casual, but newer players, less experienced players, are the ones who are getting hit with nerfs. This should make you upset. This line should make you upset. Because the top tier players who already can make top tier and who already can clear their Atlas, kill Cirrus, do Maven invitations, etc., they already can do that even in 315 with all the nerfs in play. Like, they already can make that happen. So they want to create tiers for flasks so that way flasks are still not great early and mid, but if you can push through, and if you're willing to push through, and if you're willing to scale your power, you can get that power back in the late game, which, again, the top tier players were already going to do anyway. So that, to me, there's further community faction fracturing going on there. Fracturing? Fragmenting. There we go. I have words. We are also considering adding crafting mods for flask suffixes through Helena's Master Crafting. We will also review belt mods for opportunities to improve flasks in addition to buffing or otherwise changing the unique jewels obtained through quests. We'll also review flask-focused unique items to see if there's any possible solutions that can be made accessible to players this way. For example, we could potentially create a unique item with a modifier, "Your flasks are always in effect." Oh my gosh. I'm pretty sure all the Pathfinder players just had like a little mini, yeah, they're just having a moment over there. They're salivating. A unique item, "Your flasks are always in effect." That would have to have some serious drawbacks, right? I mean, maybe it's just like a chess piece, and the only stat line on the chess piece, it gives you no armor. It's like a tabula rasa, but it's just your flasks are always in effect. It's like, man, do I want to go for the, double influenced amazing chess piece that's worth a mirror? Or do I want my flasks to always be in effect? That's interesting. Okay, additionally, we're also planning to buff the effects of enkindling orbs as high as we reasonably can, and we'll also review unique flasks further. We will also consider and discuss potential flask charge generation improvements that don't push the clear speed meta based on feedback that was raised during the podcast. We'll also share a post in the coming weeks, more posts, that announce our solidified plans for flask improvements so that we can gather feedback from the community ahead of 3.16's launch. Hey, thank you. Thank you for soliciting community feedback. That is good. Keep communicating with players and keep gathering feedback. Items. One of the issues we're currently facing in Path of Exile is that for the most part, players no longer find their item upgrades by checking the items on the ground. Yep. This is something we'd very much like to solve, and we'll be mindful to not do this in a way that effectively results in a sweeping nerf. Oh gosh. What does this mean? How could they even nerf items that drop on the ground? That line makes me scared. We're going to try to do this in a way that's not a sweeping nerf. Oh, one way that they could just make all the items that drop be better than what we can craft is just sweeping nerfs to all crafting. just make it so that way all crafting options are only like tier 3 at the top end. Oh, well, look at this sword that dropped 2 tier 2 items or 2 tier 2 stats. Yeah, but one of them's mana gained on hit. Oh, but after 315, that's actually needed. Oh, man. We would like to declutter the items that drop by a lot so that things like pickup range matter less, as there would be fewer item labels on the ground competing for attention. There were a few crafting improvements announced. For example, taking obscure master crafting recipes out of places like Delve and the Pale Council and making them attainable in Path of Exile's core content. Okay, here's what's awkward about this, right? There's some master crafting recipes that are deep in Delve, right? Like 6-link, 6-socket, Pale Council. Like, if you're getting to that spot on your character, you're not a casual player, right? Surely. Like, if you know, I guess maybe that's some of the problem, is that players don't know where those crafts are. But I think if you get your character to that level, you should also know where to go and how to look up different crafts and how to access them. Like, the only reason why people interact with the Pale Council is because that's where a craft is at. Ain't nobody going, oh, guys, I can't wait to farm 75 Pale Councils and see what drops. Nobody's, or maybe people are doing that and I'm just unaware of it. Maybe I'm too much of a scrub and I don't realize that there's a Pale Council meta out there for farming. You know, where's the Pale Council rotas that aren't dependent on the crafting station? That's why people do Pale Council. For a lot of players, that's why they do Delve. I guess if you want to argue, well, we want to take that away so that way players don't feel like they have to do Delve, then don't get the craft, right? Like, if you want the craft, then you do the content to do that craft. This to me sounds like, hey, we're going to move it to core content, which means we're going to put it somewhere obscure on the Atlas and it'll be RNG gated. Like, I don't know. I'm worried about those being RNG gated. We're also planning to improve veiled modifiers so that they unlock all tiers immediately upon discovery rather than needing to level them. However, note that the more advanced veiled modifiers may still require multiple unveils. By the way, let me know how I'm reading today, guys. I'm not doing it with my glasses. I left my glasses at work today. It's a long day at work and I forgot my glasses to bring them back home. Regarding chase items that drop from specific bosses, the point was raised that items like Adziri's Disfavor are not powerful enough to be a good reward from the specific boss they drop from. It used to be a powerful reward, but we've nerfed it and changed the game around so much that it's no longer. What a shock. We have discussed reviewing these and potentially rebalancing item drop locations. Okay, let's roll with Adziri's Disfavor for a second. Where on earth could Adziri's Disfavor drop that it would possibly be a good reward spot? Like, unless you change the level requirement on Adziri's Disfavor, at the moment, with the way how Adziri's Disfavor is used and what players could possibly use it for, it's primarily used as a melee axe used mostly for Cyclone. If you take it away from Adziri's loot drop table, and you say it can drop from any boss starting at Act 6 on. If you were able to use an Adziri's Disfavor, okay, at Act 6, you could use it. Would you still use it through Act 7? Would you still use it through Act 8? Would you still use it when you get to Act 9? What about when you start farming Blood Aquas? Would you be looking for another weapon? Like, that is an iconic, I would say, anything that's got Itziri in the name, it's like Chevron stuff. Like it should drop from the boss or something related to the boss, some area or some zone or some tile set that's in some way related to the boss. If you're going to do any specific drops related to bosses, you would think it would be the ones that are named after the bosses that should be specific, right? So I'm just rolling with this. Hopefully I'm not fixating on this item specifically. I'm saying in general, if you're going to have a loot table that specifically drops from certain bosses, certainly the items that are droppable from those bosses will be attached to the name of that boss. And some of those bosses are gated behind certain levels of progression. So, like, unless you just buff disfavor, like, how does changing that, rebalancing the item drop locations change disfavor's popularity or usability? I don't know. That's interesting. It's funny. It's funny too that the chase item from specific bosses. It's funny that Itziri's disfavor is the chase item that they use here. A lot of you players, especially those of you who are willing to drop comments and who have played League content for a long time, like I don't think I've ever seen anybody with a comment like, I'm chasing Itziri's disfavor, but I just can't get one to drop, and I've farmed this many Itziri's. It's been a long time since Itziri's has been a chase item. Like that in and of itself, as an example, is kind of interesting to use. Okay, we also promised to have a look at the results of the 314's change where various league-specific items were moved into the core drop pool to make sure that we consider if any should be restored to being boss-specific. We heard the feedback that players want the ability to deterministically grind for specific items to a larger degree than they currently can. Players also expressed that they'd appreciate improvements to the trade site or a separate auction system to make it easier to trade large quantities of certain items like currency maps or items. We also discussed making sure that we communicate when a divination card's drop location is changed, that players are not wasting their time farming areas that previously could but can no longer yield the item they're looking for. Okay, so they didn't promise anything here, but they said, hey, players are talking about this. Notice they don't say they're doing anything about it, but they say players are talking about it. Okay, GGG. We're talking about it a lot. A lot. So you're saying there's a chance. I think that would lead to the single biggest spike of players in Path of Exile, at least on a patch. If GGG came out tomorrow and said, hey, there's an auction house and we've got it implemented in game, I think that would seriously bring back massive amounts of players who are like, well, the only reason why I wasn't playing POE is because I had crap trade. Now it's got great trade. I'll play it. It'd be a big risk because it's kind of like Harvest. It's another Pandora's box. Like once you show off an auction house sort of system to the POE community, if you take it away, it ain't going to go over well. All right, Chris also talked about an internal gameplay mode that he and other founders were toying with, focused around extreme item scarcity. It's worth noting that the discussion of this hard mode was to provide context for how we are investigating potential changes to the item system in a relatively clean sandbox. We'll post more about hard mode in its own post in the coming weeks if we decide it's something we want to release publicly. Okay, so Chris gets us all excited for a hard mode. Some of us, I don't think hard mode should be the base game, but if there's a hard mode option to play, I think it'd be fun. It'd be fun to mess around with. For me, for a long time, I used to play hardcore and then softcore every other league. It was 2 or 3 years that I basically bounced back and forth between that. So, okay. So this is walking back hard mode a little bit. We'll see if Chris doubles down on this on Wednesday's podcast with Gazzy and Grimro and Tuna. We'll see. We'll see if he's like, we had to say that we weren't sure about releasing this publicly, but that's because we're not sure when it is that we can release this and what it's going to be like. And we'll see about this. It kind of seems like he's walking this back a little bit. Yeah? I don't know. Let me know what you guys think. I think that paragraph reads like we're trying to walk it back a little bit. Aspirational content. In the lead up to the first Bay Class podcast, many community members rallied around to brainstorm which topics would be most pressing to address with Chris. One of the big topics that was that some players have a strong desire for more challenging content in the endgame. Oh my gosh, it's 2016 again. Oh! Path of Exile players complaining about lack of endgame. Are we going back down this road? Is that what we're doing? We do have some ideas for aspirational content we've been working on, essentially Uber versions of existing endgame encounters. Here are some of the ones that we've been considering for 316. Okay, here's some examples. Like, guys, we have so much endgame. It makes me upset. The reason why it makes me upset and frankly, like, just exhausted that's even a complaint. Does anybody remember, if you've played Path of Exile prior to Delve's launch, if you played prior to Shaper, you should have zero complaints about the endgame options. We do not have a problem in Path of Exile about not having enough stuff to do. That is not a problem in Path of Exile. It's not. And the amount of players who are complaining that there's not enough stuff to do are such a tiny, minuscule portion of the actual player base who can interact with it. How many of you players have ever done a 5-way? How many of you players have ever completed a 5-way, even in a party, let alone being the one who's carried the 5-way Legion fight? How many of you have ever done that? I bet very few of you, especially since it's no longer Legion League and it's not that big of a deal to farm. It's no longer the most optimal way to push for 100. There's so much aspirational content that's out there. I guess the 1%ers really want more top-end content, so there you go. Increasing the drop rate of Delirium Orbs and making 5-time Delirium Orb encounters more rewarding. Additionally, we would likely make the 4 times, 3 times, 2 times, and 1-time Orb encounters more rewarding, but to a lesser extent than the 5-time Orb encounter. Okay, so prep your builds for 316 accordingly, folks. Start looking up Delirium encounter farmers. And then for the market, hey, Delirium, everything related to Delirium is going to be up in price if they implement that. Considering adding an additional 5 to 10 waves to the end of the simulacrum. See that? I don't know how they would do that, like what the intensity of coding could be, but the content's already there for that, right? So this one's tweaking drops, but GGG gets nervous about tweaking drops. This one's just adding more waves of monsters that get tougher. I don't know which one's easier to code. I would assume this one's easier to code, but this one's probably scarier. GGG's usually more scared about giving us more rewarding stuff. Making Delve a lot more rewarding at a much shallower depth, so that around depth 1000 and 1500 it becomes much more rewarding, but also much more difficult than it currently is, in a more meaningful way. The downside to this is that it changes the parameters for what players should expect in terms of ladder achievement compared to the past. Yeah, players in the past that are like, well, I've gotten to X thousand number of depth would no longer be able to get there. Most likely, players wouldn't reach the depths they were once able to. The upside is that it should become more interesting to a larger group of players and generally more rewarding for players who engage with it. We would also improve Delve's catch-up mechanic so that if you make it to Tier 16 maps without delving, you'll be able to start at a deeper depth than you would before. Hey, you know what made players engage with Delve? Darkness farming. Like a different build, a different meta, a different set of things to do. It was helpful for the economy. It was helpful even in an SSF scenario to get your own fossils going. Like, I don't know. I guess that's just totally off the table. Why would building characters for specific content in a game that's about building characters for content be an option on the table? Why not change the content so that way it's more rewarding, right? That seems to be this approach. I miss darkness farming and the entire concept of having more specific content for more specific characters. I think that's a good design thing to do, but they don't. Considering the Uber domain of timeless conflict, considering what Uber blighted maps could be, oh, that could be interesting. It's a blighted map, but now every minion is Shaper. Oh, what are you going to do? When it eventually returns to the core game, allowing for more than 10 waves in an ultimatum so that people can push further if they can, but against insane difficulty. This would come alongside an entire ultimatum monster rebalance alongside redoing all of its modifiers. That sounds like a lot of work. Adding a new tier of breach stones. Oh, there you go. If this comes into play, then guess what? Just like we said about Delirium, breach stones, all the prices will go up, and be prepared for there to be an entire meta around just buying up the new breach stones and pushing for 100. That's... Whenever there's been a buff to breach stones, that's what it's been. We will aim to do a few of these alongside 316, but some of these ideas may be implemented later or redesigned before they make it into the game. Okay, so they're going to do some of this. Yeah, that's kind of what they're committing to here. They're going to do some of this. I might have to not be a casual for 316. I still don't think endgame players can complain that there's not enough stuff to do. But if this is going to be so rewarding, that economically this is just legitimately the best thing to do, then actually, you know what? Who am I kidding? Because there is no, where is it? Because there is no auction house, the best thing to do, at least for me, is just to sit in my hideout and trade all day. That's the best thing. Just look at the economy and manipulate it as best I can. Endgame content. Our 3.17 expansion in January includes a full rework of the Atlas of Worlds and Path of Exile's endgame mechanics. We're taking player feedback into account while designing our new Atlas systems and endgame pinnacle boss encounters. In the meantime, we're aware that players feel that it takes too long to unlock the current Atlas, and we have had a discussion around what quick changes we could make to improve the experience in 3.16. In 3.16, we're planning to reduce the Atlas to 4 regions rather than 8. This means players need to defeat 16 conquerors rather than 32. Hey, that's already instantly, right? A lot of players are going to like that. See, I don't see how you can rejoice with this, but then say, hey, we want more to do. How can you say you want less to grind through the Atlas, but hey, we want more? I guess it's different content, right? Grinding maps is different than having specific endgame rewarding content, I guess. Right? Because this is like repeating content once you've completed your Atlas, whereas this is getting to, okay, so one is progression, the other is true endgame. Never mind, I sorted that out. I talked my way through it. Okay, so in the future, we'll reshuffle map layouts, and there would be about 100-ish maps to complete rather than 160. Okay, I like that. So they're going to shuffle maps between expansions in the same way that we rotate Zana mods. We will be mindful that each expansion should include a variety of different map layouts, including ones that are most popular with players. Various adjustments will be made to Atlas bonuses so that you still receive the correct total number of awakening levels and overall Atlas completion bonus despite having played less content to reach that point. I think that's good news for casual players, right? The more casual you are, we did a whole 2-hour discussion on Twitch the other day about that. The VOD is up on YouTube. But for those of us who have less time, who have less knowledge, who have experienced less content, and who have less skill in Path of Exile, that's good news. It means that you can have less of all of that and still get some level of progress on the Atlas. We will need to adjust how Atlas passives work in order to achieve this. We don't have a plan to announce in this regard just yet, but we'll let you know once we do. All right, splinters. There was much discussion around splinters, most notably around the extra clicking that they introduce. Chris confirmed that we have heard this feedback and don't plan to drop trivial splinters in future leagues. They will have to be valuable and represent an exciting drop that is worth the click. Oh boy. So is the feedback that we don't like splinters in general, though? Is that the feedback? That it's not just that splinters are extra clicking. It's that, like, Chris had a great quote. I forget if it was on Bay Class or with Ziz and Mathel, but he had a great quote. He said, if we drop something, you're angry. If you drop nothing, you're angry. So I do think this is a damned if you do, damned if you don't scenario. Like, if splinters just drop, as a full breachstone, but they become rarer to drop altogether. Like, what if killing a breach lord or something automatically just dropped a breachstone? That would make it very exciting to kill the breach lord, but every single breach that you don't find a breach lord in, you'd be like, whatever, right? So, yeah, to quote the wise Chris Wilson, you're angry when we drop something and you're angry when we don't. So splinters are a tough one. It's just tough. In the meantime, we have some splinter improvements planned where possible. We will merge splinter drops like Legion splinters and breach splinters. When there is an instance of delayed loot drops like an ultimatum or incursion, we'll merge all stackable items and split stacks between party members. Yeah, like what about Legion? What if you just made all the generals and the special guys, the special bosses? What if they were just showed up less, but they just straight up would drop you the Legion encounter? Like the whole thing. I don't know. I don't think players would like that. I think players would be like, I can already see the Reddit post or the forum post. I've farmed 17,000 legions and never gotten an encounter yet. Where are the generals? They changed the drop table. Additionally, we'll review less valuable single square items like wisdom scrolls or orbs of transmutation and make it so that they drop less frequently but in higher stacks. For example, in maps, just wait until this gets screwed up in some way and nobody drops a wisdom scroll all league and people are like, guys, wisdom scrolls are more valuable than mirrors. For example, in maps, you might see wisdom scrolls 5 times less often, but they'll drop on average stack sizes of 5 or so. It could also mean, for example, that in a breach, that instead of several splinters, you're getting a larger stack of them every few breaches. Ultimately, you'd be getting the same amount of these overall, but have less clicks. That's good. That's good. Less clicks is good for all of our fingers and wrists and hands and arms. Additionally, when Expedition eventually becomes part of the core game, hey guys, Expedition is eventually becoming a part of the core game, we will be very careful on how its artifacts are handled, being mindful of the clicks involved. Yeah, I think Metamorph was kind of a Pandora's box in this way. They showed us that they can like just automatically go into something, that there is the tech there, that they know how to do it. So that's kind of the challenge. I mean, organs are tradable. Metamorph organs are tradable. Artifacts from Expedition are tradable. Like, all this stuff is tradable. Like, yeah. Yeah. Yep. Okay. Just a few more things and then we're done. UI and controls. It was noted that Path of Exile has different UI on console platforms as they are played with a game controller rather than a mouse and keyboard, and the question was asked about whether it could be made available to PC users. We're working towards adding controller support to the PC, as well as eventually mouse and support for consoles. We'll update you when those are ready. We've also note that there have been a lot of requests for better colorblind support. Since the podcast, we've worked out a plan for making sockets visually differentiatable, and we'll be revealing it soon. Hey, that's great. That's really cool. I don't have any kind of colorblind status, but I've often noticed that when I'm playing different games, playing colorblind mode allows me to see things better. I haven't officially been diagnosed with any kind of colorblind status, but I've just noticed that. So this is cool. More options are better for display. We have also engaged with many colorblind users and accessibility experts who have written in and have appreciated their feedback. That's good news. That's great. That's designers, like the design team is communicating with players and eliciting feedback and then responding. That's good. All right, POE 2. During the podcast, it was asked if we could expect to see Path of Exile released before 2024. Our answer was yes. Okay, so start your countdown timers. We are maximum 3 years away, right? Because it's going to be released before 2024. So even if it's released December 31st of 2023, that's still before 2024. We're also hiring world-class environmental artists for POE 2. Please email us at hr@grindinggeargames at grindinggear.com if you're interested in working with us. All right. POE Royale. One of the pieces of feedback raised during the podcast is that several players would like to be able to queue for a Royale session while playing the main game. Yeah, that's because Royale, its queue is already dead. Has it been out like more than a month now? It's already dead. This is precisely, by the way, what Chris said about POE Royale. So when POE Royale came out, a whole bunch of us were like, please bring Royale back. We loved it. We'll play it all the time. And they said, look, we don't think it's worth it. We don't think players are going to play it. The queue is going to be awful. We're not bringing it back for the foreseeable future. And then they dropped it on us, and it's great. I think it's really fun. I think it's enjoyable. I think the weekends only thing, on the one hand, having a limited window to play it makes sense because it means that there's less of those moments where you're just queuing up and you're not getting a game. Like more players are playing at a concentrated time. But some players don't play on the weekends. Like a lot of players just play during the week, and during the weekends they don't play. So I get that there's pushback either way. It's a tricky thing to have a queue for that. If they could figure out how you'd play regular PoE, it'd be interesting. Like, what happens if you decide to go into a map and you queue up for PoE Royale and a Mirror of Calandra drops for you and then you jump into your Royale match? How does that work? Do you exit back out of your Royale match and then go back into your map device and hope that the zone hasn't reset? Right? Is that like, there's those kinds of issues, and I'm sure many others that could come up with that even once the tech gets figured out. South African servers. Many players are asking for a gateway in South Africa. After it was mentioned on the podcast, we've been doing some tests to check out viable candidates, data centers. We'll post more information once we've worked out a plan. In closing, we'll be discussing the above details in future announcements as they become solid plans. We have a lot more to reveal in 316 than we've been working on. We've been really enjoying doing these community podcasts and hope to continue doing these in the future. Hey, that's good news. Thank you. They have really helped with communicating and discussing complex topics. That's good news, right? If GGG comes away from all of this stuff and says, hey, this is a good thing, we should keep doing it, that's a success. Right, that's a success. Thank you once again to all of these wonderful community people, like the whole team at Bayclast and Ziz and Mathel. They don't have a technical name at the moment for their podcast and their interview, but that was great what they did. And I'm looking forward to the upcoming interview as well this upcoming Wednesday. Anyway, so there you go. We read through the topics. We've kind of distilled them and gone through them and given you a little bit of reaction. So feel free to respond and react yourselves. Drop us a comment down below and let us know what you guys think about all of this different feedback and how things are going. I think this is healthy. I will say that. That's my summary. This is healthy. In a relationship when two parties can both say, this is what we're experiencing, this is what we're experiencing, and both of them can come together and work it out, that's a good thing. That is a very, very good thing. So I applaud Grinding Gear Games. Again, not only are they the best communicators inside the game development community, but on top of being the best communicators, they're also innovating how they communicate, and they're willing to change how they communicate. Does it mean they're perfect? Does it mean they don't do things that upset us as a player base or that we provide feedback on and gripe about or critique? No, it doesn't mean that they do everything perfect. But it does mean they're trying to get better and they're willing to implement things towards that goal. And that's really admirable. It's really exciting as a player who enjoys Path of Exile. It's really exciting as somebody who's loved Path of Exile for several years now and who wants to continue loving Path of Exile for years to come. So that's exciting to me. Anyway, thanks for joining us for today's discussion. I hope that today is the day a Mirror of Calandra drops for you. If you'd like any more information about the topics we chatted about today, links are provided down below in the video description. The G3 community has grown a ton over the last several years, and that's thanks to viewers like you and faithful Patreon supporters. Big shout out to longtime supporters and first-time supporters for this month.